Hi class! If you can believe it, we're already in week 6, getting about halfway done here. And I wanted to make a few comments about essay number 1 as you're finishing that up this week. One of the biggest things that I would caution about is to make sure you really read the directions carefully about what's required. I really prescribe the structure of essay number 1 heavily for you. There's not a lot of freedom in that. So make sure you take a look at that. I'll explain a little bit of that right now too. So anyway, for essay number 1, you should have already written your introduction and gotten the feedback back on that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to craft 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion to prove your thesis of whether your character learned their lesson or not. So the first body paragraph, you should plan to prove if how your character, how they were initially, what their initial state was in terms of the lesson. So, think of the necklace, Madame Loisel. What, in the beginning of the story, what was her initial state in terms of learning, the lesson of maybe, it kind of depends on what the lesson that they're going to be learning, but what was, I think of her initial state as being really wanting more, grass is greener, looking for more, thinking that she lived a miserable life. So that first body paragraph, you're going to prove the initial state of your character. Use at least two, I would say limit it really, but use at least 2 pieces of textual evidence. This is just like an assertion paragraph. You're going to state your claim. You're going to have context to lead into the quote. It's best to lead in with a verb, something like the narrator explains, a little tag phrase. I need to create a little video on explaining tag phrases like that, but the narrator explains. Your quote in quotation marks, make sure you cite it properly with the page number in parentheses after the quotation marks, period after the end parenthesis. And then following the quote, you need to do the most important part, which is the analysis, which shows how the quote proves that sub-assertion, the point of the paragraph. Then you lead into, you have some context setting for the next piece of evidence. Lead into it with a lead-in phrase, state the evidence, and then again, sentence or 2 of analysis that explains how that quote proves the point of your character's initial state. So that's the first body paragraph. The second body paragraph should detail, you're trying to prove what the turning point is. Prove what was their chance to learn a lesson. Okay, so what I would do is look for textual evidence about where I think in the story was their opportunity to learn their lesson. So, again, going back to the necklace as an example, there's a few different places that people might think that Madame Loisel could have learned her lesson. Maybe she should have learned her lesson when she lost the necklace. Maybe that's where you feel like the turning point was. Maybe she learned her lesson after working so long. Do you find evidence maybe you find evidence, you didn't find evidence that she initially learned her lesson, but maybe you find evidence that she did learn a lesson. So you're not proving if she learned her lesson or not. This is a little tricky, but what the lesson, where the opportunity to learn the lesson was. So some of that you have to look for if they learned their lesson or not, to try and find where they could have learned their lesson. So find 2 pieces of textual evidence that prove that some opportunity was the particular point they could have learned their lesson. I almost think focusing on what the lesson was to learn might help you keep that straight in your mind. And again, same structure as an assertion paragraph that I just reviewed for body paragraph 1. Finally, body paragraph number 3, you're trying to prove if they learned their lesson or not. I should say if he or she learned his or her lesson or not. So you're trying to find textual evidence that proves your claim of whether they learned their lesson or not. Again, same structure as an assertion paragraph. I don't need to rehash that. So those are the focus of your body paragraph. You're not using this as an opportunity to use quotes to retell the story, and that's what it's really easy for this to break down into. Really focus your mind on each paragraph, what you're trying to prove, and that can help. Now the concluding paragraph, there's should be a module on that. But concluding paragraph, what you're doing is you're trying to tie together all your points. Don't just rehash your thesis, okay? You're trying to bring together all your points, and then you're trying to add some perspective for the reader of your paper of why they should care. So what I like to do is synthesize my points, bring together all my points through my body paragraphs of what I proved about the story. And then what I like to do is open it up to try and explain to the reader of what this lesson has to do with them, what this paper had to do with them. So a lot of times what it does is you can look for contemporary examples of the lesson learned. You might look for personal examples or people you know that went through a similar experience and explain why this is relevant to the reader's life. I don't mind. I think it's because you're focusing on the reader, it's okay, I think, if you use first person or second person. Second person I would stay away from, but if you want to refer to yourself, that's okay in the conclusion. The reason why it's best to stay away from that in the rest of the paragraphs are, it's because the focus should be on proving a point, not on you. So remember, no, I thinks, I believes, whatever. If you're in the conclusion, you have stuff like that, that's okay. But you know, so for instance, what did Madame Loisel's potential lesson? How, you know, a necklace might not necessarily be the point of materialism nowadays. Maybe there's other things nowadays that have a similar symbolic nature as the necklace, and you could talk about, you know, especially in our current economic climate, what's gone on with people putting an emphasis on material things. You know, the swimmer, what does the lesson that Nettie should have learned, what does that have to do with people in general? There's every story, you really need to think about how to broaden the thesis, the theme, what the lesson learned, and try and broaden it to apply to present day, to the reader. So yeah, so that's about it that I can think of. So remember, feel free to pop me any questions. Next week, I'm pretty sure, I'll have to double check this, but I think next week is when your midterm is. I want to urge you, there's some modules on literary terms that you haven't been required to do an assignment on, but you are responsible for the information in those for the midterms. You might want to look through those. There aren't too many of them, but you should look through. Maybe, I'm not sure if you looked at point of view yet, or irony, but you should definitely take a peek through all those because you're responsible for all of the literary term information, even though you haven't had an assignment on those yet. So yeah, pop me a private message if you have any questions, and I've really been enjoying reading your discussion posts and all the assignments that you've handed my way. So keep up the great work. Bye.